All right, perfect. Let's start because we have a lot of ground to cover. So welcome again to another edition of the Into the Block webinar series, where we cover a lot of the most interesting topics in Web3, crypto, blockchain today. I'm super excited about this because we're gonna talk about a topic that is at the intersection of my two passions, artificial intelligence and crypto, and specifically we're going to be talking about all the evolution around what is called foundation models or generative AI with models like ChatGPT, GPT-4, and some ideas around how they can impact the crypto space. So the agenda is super simple. So I'm going to take you through a brief story, but sort of deep story of foundation models, right? Like some of the techniques, what's happening, why is ChatGPT. Then some of the opportunities and challenges around the intersection of Web3 and generative AI. Some of these opinions might be controversial, and then some very ambitious, aggressive ideas that I think could be explored at the intersection of these two trends. At any time, feel free to ask questions. A lot of this might be is heavy on the AI side, so feel free to stop me to ask questions. You can use the Q&A panel, and then we can stop and clarify those questions as we go along. I'm gonna go fast, but we can keep it super informal. Before that, I want to give you an update, the traditional update on Into the Block. Since for the last 3 weeks since we did our previous webinar. So first of all, we have Into the Block Analytics has a new look. So check it out. Our user experience team did a tremendous amount of work on improving the navigation, the color palette, the filtering, the usability of the platform. So this release is just user experience. So go, it's a very small release, but we're super happy with it, and the feedbacks have been super positive. So go check it out and give us some feedback. Also, Into the Block Analytics has launched different new integrations. Coin tracking, that is one of the most important tax platforms on the crypto space. So you guys should check it out, as well as Libertify. That is a very popular mobile experience for digital assets. So now other updates that we're excited about. We're onboarding a lot of the top protocols in DeFi for the DeFi Risk Radar platform that we're going to launch. It uses a lot of our risk management capabilities for DeFi. Some of the largest protocols in the space have signed up as customers, and we're going to come to market with a very large set of high-profile names. The quant side, the DeFi Smart Geos platform, we have added a ton of different strategies for protocols like Frax, for blockchains like Arbitrum, for different combinations of different protocols. And as soon as probably next week or the week after, you're going to have Optimism Analytics in ITV Analytics. So as you can see, we're pushing on all cylinders here, on the analytics side, on the quant DeFi side, as well as the risk management side. So that's it in terms of updates. If you're interested on learning more, feel free to ping me after the webinar. So to start the topic of today, I would like to take you into a journey of sort of what has been the evolution of the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years in generative AI. So generative AI was this trend that in traditional machine learning, nobody thought this was going to be big. It was a trend that was used to generate synthetic images and things like that to train models in computer vision, but it never had the sort of the DNA that it could become what has become. So this movement has come as a surprise even for some top AI researchers. I teach applied AI at Columbia University as a guest lecturer, and some of my colleagues that work in this space, that they work in generative AI, they can't believe it, right? Now, the term that in AI, that in the AI community we used to refer to models like ChatGPT and GPT-4 is foundation models. This is the term that was quoted by Stanford University. very very recently. And essentially, they use the term foundation and not foundational because essentially they refer to this new paradigm in which a model can be trained on a lot of unsupervised, unlabeled data. Like think about images that don't have any labels or the classification of classify objects or anything like that. And then you can fine tune it for very specific things. So for instance, GPT-2 was trained on all Wikipedia and things like that. And it was trained for classification and then suddenly it started exhibiting emerging capabilities. Like it was good at answering questions or generating text or things like that, that nobody thought about it. And then that paradigm has expanded to audio, to video, to computer vision with images. So you can take one of these massive models and then do what is called fine tune it, right? Fine tune it on a specific set of properties. So that's what we use this term called foundation models to refer to it. So this all started with a paper from Google called Attention is All You Need, where they outlined this architecture called Transformer that has been sort of the center of this revolution on the language side specifically. So traditional models for language, like long short-term memory models and all that, they had limitations going back on time a lot. Like if you were using an LSTM model for, let's say, managing, completing a large text, if the text was too large, it had a ton of trouble. So Google figured out this architecture in which that it would infer which areas of that text were more important to pay attention to, and it was able to scale massively. So transformers is what has been at the center of architecture side, the GPTs essentially, and the evolution has been tremendous, right? So since 2016, that is when that paper, the BERT paper, came out, we saw a lot of progress, including the release of the first GPT and GPT-2 in 2019, and we went to GPT-3, and at some point there was a race for a lot of super large models emerging from Microsoft and Google's and others. And then everything changed with the release of ChatGPT or GPT 3.5, and we're going to go through that. But an important thing here is that these large language models, foundation models, are not constrained to language, right? Obviously, ChatGPT is still in all the headlines, but there is a lot happening in domains like computer vision with things like DALL-E 2, Mid-Journey, Stable Diffusion. There is a lot happening in video with capabilities like runway ML and things like that. There is a lot happening in 3D. So at some point, GPT-3 was the dominant foundation model, but had some marked limitations. In particular, it was not very good at following instructions. So it could answer questions, but if you tell them generate an email with these characteristics, it just didn't know how to do it or how to do it at a large scale. So what changed? So what changed between GPT-3 and GPT 3.5 that it was really the foundation for ChatGPT? The answer goes back to 2017. So in 2017, researchers from OpenAI published this paper called Reinforcement Learning with Human Feedback. The acronym is RLHF. You're gonna hear this all over the place if you're diving deeper into this space. So reinforcement learning is this technique that became famous because it was the technique used by DeepMind to train AlphaGo that beat Lee Sedol, the former Go world champion. And it was the first time that an artificial intelligence model was able to master Go, that it was supposed to be impossible. So reinforcement learning is, our models are trained by trial and error. I try an action, I get a reward function that tells me, hey, you did well or not, and I adjust over time. The big problem with reinforcement learning is that it requires a ton of data to scale. So to build AlphaGo, so the AlphaGo model had to train the equivalent to hundreds of years of a human player playing Go nonstop. So that was a major limitation. However, OpenAI figured that you could actually improve quite a bit use reinforcement learning techniques to align with human preferences, right? Because a lot of these models did things that had nothing to do with human preference. So this research was published in 2017, and nobody paid attention to that. But last year, at the beginning of last year, OpenAI figured out how to combine GPT-3 with RLHF on a thing called Instruct GPT. So again, it's a model for the beginning of 2022. Nobody paid too much attention to it, but essentially it figures that if you use a language model and put a layer of reinforcement learning on top, you're gonna start tuning it to produce outputs that that humans will like, specifically to follow instructions. So suddenly you could tell GPT-3, hey, could you write an email with these characteristics? Hey, could you generate images is a little bit different. Could you complete a text, but in this specific format? So to follow instructions that align with a specific human instruction. So they built this model called Instruct GPT that has been the foundation of ChatGPT. So Instruct GPT plus GPT-3 gave us ChatGPT. So the one thing that ChatGPT does very well that GPT-3 couldn't was to follow instructions. So that was the main thing. But there is a lot of things that derive from just following instructions. Now, what transformer models completely revolutionized machine learning. It's probably the main architecture today. A lot of the previous architectures across the board have fallen behind. In the computer vision space, meaning images, there has been a variation of transformer models called diffusion models. That is sort of what transformers did for languages. Diffusion models are doing for computer vision. So diffusion models are a little bit more complex to explain, but fundamentally, they have the capability of taking an image as an input, introducing a lot of noise to the point that it's unrecognizable, and then reconstructing it back to something close to the original image. So OpenAI also had a lot to do. That had a lot to do with the advancing research here. So a couple of years ago, they published this model called CLIP that essentially figure out that if you have language and you model language on a very high dimensional space and take image and model in a very high dimensional space, the proximity between the two, they look quite similar. What that means is that you could take a language instruction and infer an image from it. And that's what was the foundation, the genesis of models that could take text and generate images that we haven't seen. The explosion of that has been tremendous, right? We're seeing OpenAI with DALL-E, we're seeing Midjourney that seems to be ahead of everybody else in terms of image quality. Stable diffusion is super interesting because it's open source. DALL-E 2, the new DALL-E is rumored to be like super high quality. And stable diffusion in particular, to me, is a pivotal model moment in the history of generative AI, because it was the first time that one of these models was made open source at a scale. Like everybody was so concerned with reasons, right? Like it could be used for unethical or harmful ways, and there comes these guys out of nowhere and said, let's trust the open source delivery model, and they put it out there. And obviously that has divided there's a huge debate in the generative AI community, whether you go with a closed source model like OpenAI or with an open source model like Stability AI, that is a company behind Stable Diffusion, or not really. Stable Diffusion came from an AI lab in the University of Munich, but these are the guys that figure out how to distribute it. And that has been that dynamic and debate that has been happening. So other capabilities such as mathematics, like the ability of reasoning through very complex mathematical problems, and coding has also emerged. And you have models like GPT-4 that are based on things, another model called Codex that is able to generate code from language. And some of these models are very good at reasoning through math problems at even the International Mathematical Olympics level, right? So very high complexity. There are some that are using to sort of influence new scientific discoveries. There are a couple that have been able to discover, to iterate and discover new and prove new mathematical theorems. There was one of these models that was able to recently come up with a better form to do matrix multiplication, which at a scale is the foundation of machine learning. So they're getting very good at across a lot of different domains. And finally, so we have text, computer vision, image. All this is merging into this area that is called multimodality model. So GPT-4 is a multimodal model. So GPT-4 is able to do, it can do images, can do code, can do language, and within language can do many things, but it's not the only one. So you have, obviously, Google has their own line of research here with a model called Lambda that is powering an assistant called BART. Stanford University just came out. Actually, let me go the order. Facebook recently, Meta released this thing called Llama, and Stanford took Llama and built a ChatGPT competitor called Alpaca. There are startups like Anthropic, that is an OpenAI competitor that has raised a ton of money, over $1 billion at this point. Cohere as well, building on the language space. This group, there was a group from over 1,000 machine learning experts that got together and built a model called Bloom, and it's just happening all over the place. So the innovation in this space is like nothing we have seen before. I do believe we subscribe to this thesis that generative AI is probably the most transformational technology movement of the last 2-3 generations. And we haven't seen anything like this, and hopefully nobody gets offended because we work in digital asset, but crypto definitely doesn't have the same level of impact and risk. This is going to change everything. How we write code, how do we consume content, how do we interact with content, platforms that the entire development stacks are going to be created on this new paradigm. So what does that mean for Web3? So in the last 2 months, I published 2 articles on CoinDesk. I had the positive and the negative side of this. So there is this article about the opportunities for Web3 and generative AI, and then I'm going to talk about sort of the negative side of it. So obviously, Web3 could be a tremendous user of generative AI capabilities, and there are some scenarios that come to mind. So if you like to think about this in a sequence of events, I guess the first sequence could be dApps that use generative AI capabilities, and then the second step could be brand new dApps or infrastructure components that have generative AI built in as a core component. And we'll see what the problems with that are. So on the dApps using generative AI capabilities, you have plenty of examples. So conversational wallet. So imagine that instead of going through the traditional experience in a wallet today, I can just talk to it, and I can ask, hey, I'm gonna buy ETH. Anything relevant about this? What has happened with Uniswap in the last 2 days? I heard about this hack, exploit on sentiment. What can you tell me about it? What were the latest transactions? Like all sorts of things I can just interact with it and has that knowledge built in. So that's an interesting scenario. One of the ones that I think somebody should definitely do it is a language-based explorer, right? Explorers are sort of the entry point for many users into the blockchain space. So providing a conversational interface to browse transactions and addresses and things like that is and in a long-form dialogue, I think it's very, very interesting. Then, because these models can do code, this idea of a smart contract co-pilot is interesting to me, not so much for the generating smart contracts on the fly, although that's interesting, but an area that is very present today is security testing. So the traditional way to do this is you write a smart contract, you write hire an auditing firm, wait a few weeks, you get a report, and every time you modify it, this has to change. Well, what if you could have models that could just look at the structure of your smart contract and based on the latest vulnerabilities that have been published, they can generate a ton of security tests and improve it all the way from development time to production time, because typically the cycle here is you have a smart, you need to wait until a smart contract is ready to submit it to audit. Like, why couldn't you incorporate that type of security testing since the beginning in an intelligent way? Obviously, NFTs, right? NFTs were sort of the first adopters of generative AI capabilities in the form of generative art. So imagine that you have collectibles in which you can interact with it. You can ask questions, right, about the inspiration of the artist or things like that, or they can adapt to your mood, to the economic circumstances of the day, or things like that, and change colors or things like that. There is an entire area of generative art that is really experimenting with these capabilities. Now, there are plenty of challenges. So this is not very trivial to do. And this is another article that I published a few days ago in which I said, look, the next ChatGPT is probably not going to be built in Web3 unless we change something. The fundamental thesis here is that generative AI is probably creating a massive gap between Web2 and Web3. So the reason is very simple. Web3 doesn't have a machine learning foundation. So for a decade, we just didn't bother to incorporate machine learning capabilities in Web3 application. It was too early, whatever, but we just didn't have it. So think about the way that Web3 finally started getting some momentum with DeFi and NFTs, and now Web2 gets generative AI and it goes a skyrocket. Right, a lot of the innovation on generative AI, if not all the innovation, is happening in Web2 because the foundations are there. So then Web3 runtimes, blockchains, they're very costly to scale for the size of these models that require billions, in some cases trillions of parameters. The data sets are humongous and things like that. So consequently, nobody has thought about pre-training GPT-4 on a blockchain runtime because the current runtimes are not optimized for that level of compute. And then because generative AI is just taking off at a massive way, and then it coincides with not a great time that we're experiencing in the crypto market, a lot of engineering talent is gravitating towards that space instead of Web3. A lot of VC investment is gravitating toward that space. So it could, and these things, they don't evolve linearly or even polynomially. It's multi-exponentially, because once one of these models becomes very good, it just keeps getting better and better and better, and just recreating that experience in a different runtime, it becomes impossible at some point. So this is a very serious threat, and it should be taken that way. Threat in the sense that a lot of the innovation is happening elsewhere, and we need to figure out ways to bring it into, make Web3 a participant in that ecosystem. Ignoring this is really not gonna get us anywhere. I know many people might disagree with this, but there is very quantitative studies that sort of validate this thesis. Now, it's not all dark. There's some areas in which we think generative Web3 can contribute to generative AI today. One is that there has been this trend of decentralized AI. In our world, we have some examples like Singularity Net, like Fetch. They have raised money and all that, but really the adoption has been limited compared to the traditional world. I think there is a place to have decentralized generative AI, right? Like, I think there is value on not giving this model, running these models in centralized infrastructures that could be controlled, and we don't really know what's happening. Nobody knows what's happening inside GPT-4. Really, like having this in environments that are more transparent, there is merit to that. And one of the biggest problems that we're facing in generative AI is what is called the human alignment problem. That essentially, how do you align these models to represent what the better end use of our nature, right? The best characteristics of humans, and that has to do with transparency, with controlling bias, fairness, preventing harmful use case. And in order to do that, you need a layer of transparency of things like that. And I think blockchains could definitely play a role on that. I see a couple of questions. I'm gonna stop to answer in a couple of slides. So So there are ways, right, in which Web3 could really become a participant in the generative AI movement. Now, let's think about some moonshots, right? What if we go? This is an area that I spend probably more time than I should thinking about. So what if we go from being a user of generative AI to embodying generative AI as a core component of Web3? These ideas are super ambitious, but they're technically possible. So none of this requires a research breakthrough or anything like that. It requires a ton of money, which is different. So like what we said before, right? Web3 applications at the beginning, they're going to use foundation models. You're going to have wallets, explorers, creating chats, and silly things like that. Now, in the future, and the future could be next month, you're going to start seeing new generations of apps and blockchains and things like that built with these things as a core component, because all software is going to be rewritten with these things as a core component, and Web3 is really not that special. So it's also going to happen here. So here's an idea. What if we had a blockchain just for generative AI designed for this? So I think the guys from Near are sort of thinking around this area. So think if we had a blockchain runtime, particularly layer 2, like I think the combination of layer 2 and zero knowledge proof or zero knowledge technology in particular is in general, I'm sorry, is very interesting here. To have a blockchain in which you can actually pre-train a lot of these models, run a lot of these models, have the core public data sets that you can use to pre-train, have all the traceability, the tooling, the transparency, the interpretability. That's very interesting. And you will have, the data sets that were used to train Bloom, and you have the Bloom model and the weight and the smart contracts that will allow you to interact with models. And then we will have proof of what these models know, what they did and when they did it and why they did it. And well, the why is a little bit not so trivial, but we can try. But essentially, we can start writing a smart contracts that interact with these things on chain, right? And all the computation happens there. We're not gonna get there with the runtimes we have today, I don't think. So I think this is gonna require a new type of blockchain. Intuitively, I think this is going to require layer 2 with zero knowledge technology. And then probably another super ambitious idea is this thing that we call block GPT. That is, what if we can take one of these models and pre-train it into all blockchain knowledge? This is expensive as hell. We actually looked into it at ITV, like all blockchain transactions in Genesis, all Ethereum, all Avalanche, all news, Discord, and everything, and pre-train it with that, and just have it learn, relationships between events in blockchains, automatically discovering new entities, finding patterns, asking questions about white papers, evolutions of things. So not reaching out for content and telling ChatGPT, please answer this or whatever, that's simple. So, but actually building a core model just on blockchain content. Bloomberg this weekend launched this thing called the research paper called Bloomberg GPT. And it's this idea for financial data. It's essentially this. I think the blockchain data sets are much larger, so the cost here might be comparable. I don't know, but it's certainly doable. It just requires some amount of capital. But what is undoubtedly is that a new generation of Web3 platforms should emerge using generative AI as a core component, not as an external API that we use and things like that, but built in the runtimes itself. So that's all I have. I'm going to go to questions in a second, but just to summarize this, generative AI, make no mistake about this, is the most transformational technology in several generations. I, in my tech career, haven't seen anything like this. Web3 applications such as explorers and wallets are going to get modernized. With this, there are challenges, very serious challenges. Web3 hasn't been designed for this type of foundation models. That has to be addressed, but it's addressable. And there, if you start thinking about these problems, and just using what is being created in other industries as a proxy, you start landing in some very ambitious ideas like the ones I mentioned. That's all I have. Somehow I managed to do this in 30 minutes. The next webinar, before I go to questions, our head of research, Lucas Otomuro, in 3 weeks is going to be talking about quantitative risk models for automated market makers. We did a similar one for lending protocol. It was PAC, and it was one of our best webinars. So we expect the one for AMMs to be equally good. The link is in the webinar chat, so please register. And I'm gonna go to questions. So there are a few. So let me go all the way back to the top. So there is somebody's asking, do you think our reliance on AI might have a negative that's a negative impact in humans? It's a philosophical question. So last week there were 1,400 experts, including people like Elon Musk, Joshua Venture, that is a Turing Award winner, the CEO of Stability AI, and many others, that published this thing calling for a 6-month moratorium on AI, on the foundation model training, essentially stopping work on any model more powerful than GPT-4. And I even published in my newsletter an article sort of disagreeing with that, but I tried to not be controversial. I think these things has a net positive impact in humanity. In general, I think this is like the telegraph that connected for the first time. Messages went from letter to being sent in minutes. I think it's like the internet. I think it's like the steam engine, and probably way more powerful. There's some risk, but I think it's a massive leap forward in humanity. So Tudor Gabriel said, one of the most interesting webinars. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, somebody said that the subtitles help understand better. Thank you as well. Some comments about Solana for this. Rust is not a very great language for machine learning just yet, but there's some stacks that are emerging there. Matteo is asking if you can study all these things without a bachelor degree. You know, it's interesting. These models are getting simpler, no more complex to study. Like machine learning used to be this problem that you needed to be a PhD in ML and understand these models. Now these models are available, and it's becoming more like a product problem rather than a machine learning problem. Somebody said near. Joshua said Rust being all hell, imagine to create AI on the blockchain with it. Okay. Perfect. He also said a decentralized AI on the blockchain, that is a recipe for disaster that we cannot shut down. Not true. So decentralized AI hasn't really worked. Now, the fact that you have dApps on a blockchain doesn't mean that you cannot shut it down. If not, you know, how many times have we stopped Solana or things like that? You can always have safety triggers about this. I tend to try to remain humble about these things. We don't really understand this model. So the way to understand this is experimenting with it. So I typically will stay away from making grandiose statement that this is going to work or it's going to be a disaster, because we really don't know. I mean, this is brand new. And then Ruben said, well, if all AI is deployed on the blockchain, it won't be incentivized and it will die. Yeah, no, that's funny, but no, and definitely not AI. Not all AI is being deployed in the blockchain. We already proven that. It's more like no AI is being deployed in blockchain. We have the opposite problem right now. How soon do you think AI and Web3 can help revolutionize agriculture? No idea. But there is a lot of interesting scenarios in agriculture for generative AI, for taking pictures of crops and doing predictive work with that. Wonderful information. What are the current ongoing projects that implement AI on blockchain? I think Fetch AI is recently raised a large round. Singularity has been added for a while, has a lot of talent in that team. There are other protocols that are more at the data level, like Ocean and things like that, that are interesting. Dan, thank you for the compliments on the webinar. I just talked about Ocean and Fetch AI. Michael, so I hope that answers the question. Adrian, how about integration with 3Ds for creation? Yeah, absolutely. So there are extensions of stable diffusion. There are stables of DALL-E that are already doing 3D work. This is being actively used in gaming, although gaming is quite complex, but at least to help people design. There is this company called Runway ML that all they do is video 3D gaming, that is the engine behind the Everything Everywhere All at Once movie. So all these, those guys are amazing, and they have some high quality 3D things. Any courses you recommend for generative AI noobs? Look, man, this space is moving so fast that any course that I might be able to recommend is likely to be relevant. On a while, like the best I can do, the best I could probably recommend is to keep up with some of the blogs from Google Research, Meta AI Research, Stability, OpenAI, DeepMind, and a lot of things are coming up there on literally on a daily basis. What is your feeling about an intermediate stop on artificial intelligence development? I write a somewhat popular AI newsletter, and this weekend the editorial was dedicated to that. I think it's, in my opinion, so I already wrote about it, so I can say it. So I'm not going to presume to understand that problem. I think human alignment is probably the hardest problem on AI right now. I think the moratorium is impractical, right? Because you're not going to stop terrorist organizations, dictatorial regimes, everybody who's trying to get into this to continue work, even if you manage to convince all the good actors to stop. Also, 6 months just seems incredibly relevant. 6 months is the time that it is between one release and the other. So to me, the way to control these things is to continue developing powerful AI for safety. But obviously I could be ridiculously wrong about this, and I'm certainly not an expert on human alignment. But I think that the moratorium just seems like a very impractical idea, although the risks are certainly, there is some merit to the risk. Could you please suggest some good reference material for crypto generative AI? Not really. I mean, there is not a lot of content in that space. I think the latest 2 articles in CoinDesk in the column, my column, are probably something there. But if you want to learn about decentralized AI and all that, go to Singularity, go to Fetch. If you want to learn about generative AI, just track the generative AI teams, the OpenAI, DeepMind, and things like that. Follow their blogs; they write a lot. Generative AI is too dangerous for deepfakes. That problem already exists. Has nothing to do with Web3. And then here, some compliments on the webinar. Thank you very much. And then, how could you leverage GPT-4 by feeding historical blockchain data and social media for identify good decentralized projects? Yeah, so essentially you follow, I mean, super high level, of course, but you follow this process that is called fine tuning, right? That is essentially you take, GPT-4 is not fine tunable yet, but you can take GPT 3.5. That's also not viable because it's so expensive, but you can take one of the open source models and fine tune it on blockchain data, social media data, and things like that. And to the point that new content is coming in, you can find patterns and things like that. Then Gil asked, what do you think about integrating AI in decentralized metaverse? Look, metaverse or not, I think gaming is one. I mean, if you consider that interaction with virtual agents, I think it's one of the most interesting scenarios for this. The fact that language and computer vision has come so far, it means we're gonna have things in gaming that we never seen before, like games that never end, right? Like you could have dialogues being, created on the fly, right, and let the characters evolve, a la, Westworld type of thing, and or games that create environments as they go along that we haven't seen before, because these models are getting so good and so efficient. And a lot of the game studios today, they're not using it at that extent, but they're using it to fast track ideas, right? To create, there was, I forgot which studio in particular, but there was one of the big ones that is using it for generating all the the complementary characters in game scenes, right? Not the main characters, but all the other things that you see in game scenes at the time, and they just generated like super quick instead of trying to hire entire teams for that. What's your idea about AI on blockchain on supply chain optimization? I know very little about supply chain optimization, but not to say I know nothing about supply chain optimization. But all these problems, there is a long history of tackling supply chain problems with machine learning. So I think generative AI is just an extension of that. Adrian is saying thank you again for the webinar, and is asking, is it too late for the governments to interfere? I don't know what you mean with interfering. If you talk about regulation, no. Like, I think it's, this stuff is gonna get regulated at some point. I think Italy banned ChatGPT the other day. That seems abrupt, but it's gonna get regulated somewhere. I personally